The morning mist clung to the vacant lot on South Norton Avenue in Los Angeles on January 15, 1947, creating an eerie silence over the neighborhood of Lamert Park. A local resident named Betty Bersinger was walking with her young daughter when she spotted what she initially thought was a discarded store mannequin broken in two amidst the weeds. As she drew closer, the horrifying reality of the situation became clear, and she realized she was looking at the severed body of a human being. The woman shielded her child's eyes and ran to a nearby house to call the authorities, setting in motion one of the most infamous murder investigations in American history. When the Los Angeles Police Department arrived on the scene, they found a crime scene that was chillingly clean despite the brutality of the act. The victim had been bisected at the waist and entirely drained of blood, suggesting the killer had washed the body before dumping it in the lot. Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth toward her ears, creating a grotesque and permanent smile known as a Glasgow smile. The pose of the body was deliberate, with her arms raised above her head and her legs spread wide, indicating that the killer wanted the body to be displayed for maximum shock value. Detectives were baffled by the lack of physical evidence at the scene, as there was no blood on the ground and no footprints leading away from the body. The precision of the cut at the waist was particularly notable because it passed right through the intervertebral disc without shattering the bone. This specific detail led investigators to speculate early on that the killer possessed some level of medical training or surgical knowledge. The way the body was handled and positioned suggested a dark intimacy and a desire to humiliate the victim, even after death, turning a human being into a macabre art piece. The identity of the victim was quickly established through fingerprints sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation via early primitive fax technology known as sound photo. She was identified as Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old aspiring actress who had come to Hollywood with dreams of stardom. The press immediately seized upon the story, sensationalizing her life and her death with a fervor that had never been seen before in California. Reporters nicknamed her the Black Dahlia, referencing a popular movie of the time, and her rumored penchant for wearing sheer black clothing and dahlias in her hair. Elizabeth Short became a household name overnight, but the media coverage often obscured the tragedy of her actual life and death. Newspapers printed wild theories and unverified rumors painting her as a temptress who prowled the streets of Los Angeles at night. This character assassination complicated the investigation, as hundreds of false tips flooded the police station, making it difficult for detectives to separate fact from fiction. Despite the massive manhunt and the interrogation of hundreds of suspects, the case gradually went cold, leaving a dark cloud over the city of Angels for decades. Years turned into decades, and the Black Dahlia case remained the most famous unsolved murder in Los Angeles history, haunting the detectives who had failed to solve it. It was not until 1999 that a retired homicide detective named Steve Hodel began to look into the case from a startlingly personal angle. Steve Hodel had spent 24 years with the Los Angeles Police Department, solving hundreds of murders and earning a reputation for his meticulous attention to detail. Following the death of his father, George Hodel, he began sorting through his personal effects and found something that stopped him cold. Inside a small photo album belonging to his father, Steve found two small photographs of a young woman with dark curly hair and striking features. The woman bore an uncanny resemblance to Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, and Steve felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at the images. He recalled rumors from his childhood and the strange atmosphere of the house he grew up in, but he had never connected his father to the crime. Driven by a detective's instinct, he decided to investigate his own father to see if there was any truth to the impossible suspicion forming in his mind. George Hodel was not an ordinary man by any measure, as he was a child prodigy, with a genius-level intelligence quotient, who became a doctor at a very young age. He was a prominent figure in Los Angeles society, rubbing shoulders with artists and musicians, and hosting lavish parties at his distinctive home. However, there was a dark side to the brilliant doctor that was well known to those closest to him, including a controlling nature and a fascination with the taboo. Steve knew that his father had the medical skill required to perform the hemicorpectomy found on the body of Elizabeth Short. The home where Steve grew up and where George Hodel lived in 1947 was the Sowden House, a distinctive property designed by Lloyd Wright. The house resembles a Mayan temple with a looming, brooding facade that looks like the mouth of a shark or a beast. It was within these walls that George Hodel held his decadent parties, and where Steve began to suspect the murder might have taken place. The layout of the house, with its central courtyard and private rooms, provided the perfect seclusion for a man who believed he was above the law to commit a heinous crime. As Steve dug deeper into the life of his father, he discovered a connection to the surrealist art movement and the famous photographer Man Ray. George Hodel and Man Ray were close friends who shared a dark sense of humor and a fascination with the deconstruction of the female form. Steve hypothesized that the murder of Elizabeth Short was not just a killing, but a twisted homage to surrealist art, specifically Man Ray works like the Minotaur. The posing of the body and the surgical precision mirrored the aesthetic of the art pieces that his father admired so deeply. The investigation led Steve to uncover that his father had actually been a prime suspect during the original 1947 investigation. The Los Angeles Police Department had considered George Hodel a person of interest due to his medical background and his proximity to the social circles Elizabeth frequented. Police files revealed that George was known to have a secret room in the Sowden House where he conducted private medical procedures. This revelation validated Steve's suspicion that his father was not just a random suspect, but a man who had been in the crosshairs of the law from the very beginning. One of the most damning pieces of evidence Steve uncovered was the transcript of electronic surveillance that the district attorney had placed on the Sowden House in 1950. The police had bugged the home hoping to catch George Hodel, confessing to crimes involving his own daughter Tamara, who had accused him of abuse. During the surveillance period, the microphones picked up the voice of George Hodel, speaking to an unknown visitor in the house. His words were chilling and seemed to be a direct admission of guilt regarding the Black Dahlia murder and potentially the murder of his secretary. In the transcripts, George Hodel is recorded saying, "Sapassin, I did kill the Black Dahlia, they could not prove it now." He goes on to taunt the police, claiming that they cannot talk to his secretary anymore because she is dead. This recorded statement was a bombshell that had been buried in the files for half a century, hidden away from the public eye. Steve was horrified to realize that the authorities had heard his father virtually confess to the crime, yet they had failed to arrest him or bring him to justice at the time. The question of why George Hodel was never prosecuted despite the bugged conversations led Steve to uncover a web of corruption within the Los Angeles police force. In the 1940s, the police department was rampant with graft, and it was common for wealthy, influential men to pay for protection. George Hodel had deep pockets and powerful connections, which likely allowed him to bribe officials to look the other way. The investigation into the Black Dahlia was effectively stalled by the very people who were sworn to solve it, allowing a killer to walk free. Steve also analyzed the handwriting on the taunting letters sent to the press and the police by the killer who called himself the Black Dahlia Avenger. He hired forensic document examiners who compared the handwriting on the notes to samples of his father's writing from the same era. The experts concluded that there was a high probability that George Hodel was the author of the letters. The distinct style and phrasing used in the notes matched the intellectual and arrogant tone that Steve remembered his father using in daily conversation. Another compelling link was the discovery that George Hodel purchased large quantities of concrete sacks shortly before the murder occurred. Witnesses had reported seeing similar sacks near the crime scene, and it was theorized that the killer used the bags to transport the body parts. The size of the sacks matched the dimensions required to hold the bisected torso and legs of the victim. This logistical detail aligned perfectly with the timeline of events and the materials that were available to George Hodel at the Sowden House during that specific week in January. Steve posited that the murder took place in the basement of the Sowden House, where the thick walls would have muffled any screams. The medical room his father maintained would have provided the necessary tools and the sterile environment to perform the hemicorpectomy. The drainage of blood was a key element of the crime, and a surgical table with proper drainage would explain the lack of blood in the vacant lot. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together to form a terrifying picture of a premeditated ritualistic slaughter performed by a skilled surgeon. The connection between Elizabeth Short and George Hodel was further strengthened by witness accounts stating they had been seen together. Some reports suggested that Elizabeth had visited a clinic where George worked, or that they had met at one of the many Hollywood parties. While Elizabeth was often transient, moving from place to place, she moved in the same social orbit as George. It is entirely plausible that she was lured to the Sowden House under the guise of a medical appointment or a social gathering, only to meet a gruesome end. Steve Hodel published his findings in a book titled Black Dahlia Avenger, which became a bestseller and reignited global interest in the case. The book laid out the evidence, systematically treating the reader like a jury member in a trial that never happened. Many readers were convinced by the sheer volume of circumstantial evidence and the powerful narrative of a son investigating his father. However, not everyone in the law enforcement community was ready to accept the theory as definitive proof. Critics of the Hodel theory pointed out that the photos found in the album were never definitively proven to be Elizabeth Short. Facial recognition experts gave conflicting opinions, with some saying it was a match and others claiming the features were different. Skeptics argued that Steve was suffering from confirmation bias, interpreting every ambiguous clue as evidence of his father's guilt. They maintained that without DNA evidence or a direct confession, the case could never be truly closed beyond a reasonable doubt. Despite the skepticism, the Los Angeles County District Attorney at the time, Steve, released his book, publicly stated that the case was solved. He indicated that if George Hodel were still alive, he would have been charged with the murder of Elizabeth Short, based on the evidence Steve had compiled. This endorsement from a high-ranking legal official gave immense credibility to the theory and vindicated the years of work Steve had poured into the investigation. It was a moment of triumph for the retired detective who had risked his reputation to expose the truth. The theory also delves into the psychology of George Hodel, portraying him as a narcissist who viewed murder as a fine art. The concept that the killing was a masterpiece intended to shock the world aligns with the profile of a highly intelligent psychopath. The careful positioning of the body and the public nature of the dumping ground suggest a killer who wanted credit for his work. This psychological profile fits George Hodel, who was known for his arrogance and his belief that he was superior to the common man. Steve Hodel did not stop with the Black Dahlia case, but went on to link his father to other unsolved murders in the Los Angeles area. He suggested that George was a serial killer who operated for decades protected by his status and police corruption. These claims expanded the scope of the horror, suggesting that the Black Dahlia was just one victim in a long line of women who fell prey to the doctor. The idea of a prolific serial killer operating in the heart of Hollywood adds another layer of darkness to the city's history. The Sowden House itself has become a character in the story, often visited by those fascinated by the Black Dahlia mystery. The imposing structure stands as a silent witness to the secrets of the past and the alleged crimes of its former owner. Paranormal investigators and curious tourists flock to the location, drawn by the dark energy that seems to emanate from its stone walls. Whether or not the murder happened there, the house is forever linked to the legend of Elizabeth Short and George Hodel. The legacy of the Black Dahlia case is one of tragedy and the failure of the justice system to protect a vulnerable young woman. Elizabeth Short was more than just a body in a vacant lot. She was a daughter and a sister with hopes and dreams. The sensation surrounding her death often stripped her of her humanity, reducing her to a puzzle to be solved. Steve's investigation attempted to restore some dignity to her memory by finally naming the man who took her life. While the case remains officially unsolved in the files of the Los Angeles Police Department, the Hodel theory is widely regarded as the most plausible explanation. The combination of medical skill, opportunity motive, and the taped admission creates a compelling argument against the doctor. For many true crime enthusiasts, the mystery is effectively resolved, even if a court of law can never deliver a verdict. The story serves as a grim reminder that wealth and privilege can sometimes shield a monster from the consequences of their actions. The investigation by Steve Hodel demonstrates the power of persistence and the desire for truth even when it leads to uncomfortable places. Investigating a parent for a heinous crime requires a unique kind of courage and a dedication to justice above familial loyalty. His work has ensured that the name George Hodel will forever be associated with the Black Dahlia, preventing the killer from fading into obscurity. It is a testament to the fact that the past is never truly buried, and that secrets have a way of surfacing eventually. Elizabeth Short has become an icon of noir Los Angeles, symbolizing the dark underbelly of the Hollywood dream. Her image continues to captivate artists, writers, and filmmakers, ensuring that her story is told to new generations. The mystery of her death is part of the fabric of the city, a permanent scar on the history of Los Angeles. As long as people are fascinated by the macabre, the Black Dahlia will remain an enduring figure of intrigue and sorrow. In the end, the story of the Black Dahlia Avenger is not just about a murder, but about a son confronting the sins of his father. It is a narrative of betrayal, corruption, and the relentless pursuit of answers in a world filled with shadows. The image of the prominent doctor carrying his dark secret to the grave is a chilling conclusion to a tale that has captivated the world for nearly a century. The question remains for the viewer to decide if the evidence is enough to convict George Hodel in the court of public opinion. As we look back at the events of 1947, we are left with the haunting image of a young woman who came to the city of dreams only to find a nightmare. The Black Dahlia Avenger theory offers closure to a wound that has remained open for too long in the American consciousness. Whether George Hodel was the sole perpetrator or part of a larger conspiracy, the darkness he represents is undeniable. The mystery may never be fully solved, but the light cast by Steve Hodel has chased away many of the shadows surrounding the case. The files gathered by Steve Hodel are now part of the historical record available for future generations to examine and debate. The story serves as a warning about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of accountability in law enforcement. It challenges us to look beyond the official narrative and to question what we think we know about history. The Black Dahlia case proves that sometimes the truth is stranger and more terrifying than any fiction. Ultimately, the Black Dahlia Avenger stands as a monumental contribution to the genre of true crime and historical investigation. It bridges the gap between the past and the present, connecting a modern detective with a cold case from the golden age of Hollywood. The story of Elizabeth Short and George Hodel is a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions played out on the streets of Los Angeles. It is a story that will likely never be forgotten as long as there are those who seek justice for the silence. We leave you with the final thought that justice delayed is justice denied, but the truth has its own way of finding the light. The prominent doctor who thought he had committed the perfect crime could not have foreseen that his own flesh and blood would be the one to expose him. In the annals of crime history, the name Hodel is now synonymous with the Black Dahlia, forever linking the father and the son in a dark dance of death and discovery.